A fleet that never has accidents. First, for decades, you've rarely seen any reports about Chinese nuclear submarines colliding or having major accidents in the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, or Arctic. Even the seasonal naval forces of the US, UK, and France have had incidents at sea, including running aground, colliding with mountains, or even accidents with their own vessels. Second, you've almost never heard of any news where Chinese strategic nuclear submarines are tracked while conducting long-term patrols in the Arctic or South Pacific. Meanwhile, the long-range patrols of the US, UK, and France have been openly included in congressional reports and defense white papers for years. Third, the most authoritative noise comparison chart for Chinese nuclear submarines still dates back to the 2009 version from the US Navy intelligence, which places China's second-generation nuclear submarines at the Soviet 1970s level. Over the years, no official Chinese data has updated this chart. If you only look at the official narratives, you might think no accidents, no scandals, no negatives, which would suggest that China's nuclear submarines are stable, powerful, and unfathomably strong. But today, we will tell you the opposite. The reality is that China's nuclear submarine fleet is far behind the world's leading standards. Let's use verifiable public data to prove this. Number 1. The true starting line for global nuclear submarines. Where does China rank? Let's first clarify the generations and tiers of the major global players. US Navy. The US Navy's main attack nuclear submarines include the Los Angeles-class 3rd generation and the Seawolf plus Virginia-class 4th generation. For ballistic missile submarines, the Ohio-class 3rd generation is primarily used. Additionally, the new Columbia-class SSBN is under construction. The entire Seawolf and Virginia-class fleet is equipped with pump-jet propulsion systems, which are widely considered to have some of the quietest levels in the world today. United Kingdom. All of the UK's current nuclear submarines, including 4 Vanguard-class SSBNs and 6 Astute-class SSNs, are equipped with pump-jet propulsion. Starting in the mid-1980s, the UK adopted the pump-jet propulsion route. Many Western research institutions called its nuclear submarine fleet the world's leading average technology level. France. France's Rubius-class, Le Triomphant-class attack submarines are smaller in size, but the new generation of Le Triomphant-class submarines have excellent acoustic characteristics. The Triomphant-class SSBN is the world's second pump-jet strategic nuclear submarine with its noise level comparable to that of the Ohio-class. Russia. Russia, relying on Soviet heritage, still operates a large number of third-generation nuclear submarines. The Bore-class 955, 955A and Yasen-class 885 represents the 4th generation, with significantly improved noise reduction, though their numbers are limited. Now let's look at China. China's attack nuclear submarines include 2 093 Shang 1 and 4 093A Shang 2. After 2022, several 093B submarines were launched and began sea trials. In terms of strategic nuclear submarines, China has 1 092, which is largely retired, and at least 6 094 or 094A Jin-class submarines still in service. The US Navy intelligence and professional research by Carlson have placed them in the following sequence. 093, initial batch, noise level, equivalent to Soviet Victor 1, late 1960s. 093A, improved version, the first 2 submarines used Russian-style soundproofing tiles and vibration reduction, barely reaching the noise level of Victor 2 or 3, mid-1970s. 094 Jin-class SSBN noise level is about 120 decibels, louder than the Soviet Delta 3 from the 1970s, and is rated by multiple agencies as a typical noisy submarine. In other words, in terms of quietness, which is the most crucial indicator for nuclear submarines, China's current main fleet overall remains at the level of the mid-Cold War Soviet fleet. This is a first level of what it means to be far behind. Number 2, first level of beyond imagination, noise levels stuck in the mid-Cold War. For the general audience, terms like decibels and Victor 3 may sound abstract, so let's translate it into simpler terms. Underwater, the quieter you are, the sooner you can hear others, and the later you will expose yourself. For every additional 3 decibel of noise, the enemy's sonar detection range may increase exponentially. Number 1, 093/093A, built on the foundation of second-generation submarines but attempting to match third-generation standards. Carlson's 2023 Technical History Report is very clear. The noise level of the first 093 submarine is comparable to that of the Soviet Victor 1. The first batch of 093A submarines used in Russian-style soundproof tiles and vibration reduction systems, which lowered the noise slightly, bring it closer to the Victor 2. The last 2 093A submarines were further improved, bringing the noise level closer to that of the early Victor 3. And when was the Victor 3 designed? The late 1970s. What does this mean? While the US, UK, and France entered the 4th generation quietness era after 2000, China's attack nuclear submarines had only just touched the threshold of the Soviet 3rd generation. 094 Jin class, the noisy national weapon publicly identified. The situation is even more awkward for the 094, which is responsible for the country's sea-based nuclear deterrence. In 2004, a Chinese researcher estimated the noise level of the 094 to be about 120 decibels. In 2009, the US Navy intelligence placed the 094 in a category louder than the 1970s Soviet Delta III. In 2016, a Carnegie study further quoted estimates from Chinese scholars suggesting that in the low frequency range, the 094's noise could be around 140 decibels, which is still far from quiet submarines. To put it simply, the 094, marketed as a national strategic asset, is acoustically comparable to the old Los Angeles class and Delta III. It might barely blend into the background noise in the shallow waters of the South China Sea, but once it leaves the first island chain facing the decade-old fixed towed arrays and mobile anti-submarine networks built by the US and Japan, it is almost guaranteed to be a glowing target. Second level of beyond imagination. Sea-based nuclear deterrence is actually a false sense of security in coastal waters. In theory, the greatest advantage of strategic nuclear submarine is to hide in the deep sea where the enemy cannot find you, while you can strike their homeland at any time. However, when your submarine is not quiet enough and the range of your ballistic missiles is limited, the whole concept falls apart. Number 1, coastal hold versus oceanic patrol. Multiple public studies from Carnegie, Tsinghua, and others point out that with the JL-2 missiles range, it is extremely difficult to launch from China's near waters to reach the central United States. The actual launch position of the 094 are more focused on the Indo-Pacific, Russian Far East, and Guam. What about moving further out? The noise is too great, and as soon as it leaves the island chain, it is exposed to the multi-layered anti-submarine nets built by the US and Japan, including fixed underwater sound arrays, P-8A anti-submarine aircraft, and the US and Japan's own SSNs. Therefore, Beijing's practical choice is to keep the 094 locked in the coastal fortress zones of the South China Sea and Yellow Sea, relying on land-based aviation and surface vessels to provide protection. It may appear safe, but it is actually very vulnerable. Coastal waters have limited depth, restricting the submarine's dive space, which is not conducive to quiet operation. In wartime, the US can easily move anti-submarine nets to your doorstep. Your fortress zone will quickly become the enemy's hunting ground. Missile technology improvements cannot fill the noise gap. Some might say no problem, with the JL-3 and future JL-X missiles having a longer range, they can still reach the US mainland from coastal waters. But the issue is, even with a longer missile range, if the launch platform shines like a light bulb in the enemy's anti-submarine system, the probability of it being destroyed in wartime is still high. Without solving the noise issue, your nuclear deterrence goes from the enemy dares not to risk it to the enemy can calculate it. They will ask, what are the chances my anti-submarine network can destroy your SSBN first and then intercept your missiles? Much of Beijing's optimistic judgment regarding its sea-based nuclear forces is based on one assumption, that the enemy will kindly allow you to launch missiles from your near-home comfort zone. In true cold-blooded strategic calculations, this assumption does not exist. Third level of beyond imagination, almost no experience in long-distance patrols. Noise is the hardware, and long-range patrol experience is the software. On this point, China's nuclear submarines are also far behind what many people imagine. Number one, why do the UK, US, and France always make headlines with accidents? In 2005, two British and French SSBNs collided deep in the Atlantic. In 2000, the US submarine Greenville sank a Japanese fishing boat near Hawaii. In 2021, the US Connecticut collided with underwater terrain in the South China Sea, severely damaging its bow, forcing it to be towed back for repairs. These accidents, of course, reflect risk management issues, but they also highlight one thing. These submarines have been operating in complex waters, carrying out high-intensity long-range missions for extended periods, truly exchanging combat risk for experience. Under ice areas, shallow waters, regions dense with underwater mountains, and the edges of foreign exclusive economic zones, all of these are highly dangerous yet essential battlegrounds to become familiar with. 2. Why do Chinese submarines never have accidents? In contrast, Chinese nuclear submarines have almost zero accident reports. The most recent rumor was in 2023 when a media outlet falsely claimed that a 093 submarine had an incident in the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Ministry of Defense, US media, and the Chinese military all quickly debunked and discredited the claim. So there are only two possible explanations. Either China's nuclear submarines are technologically mature and perfectly trained, having never made a serious mistake in decades of deep sea operations. Or these submarines have simply not been tasked with high-intensity deep-sea missions and have spent most of their time circling within fortress zones. Considering the noise, missile range, and anti-submarine network realities mentioned earlier, the latter explanation seems more logical. Number 3. 2018 Senkaku tracking incident. What was exposed is just the tip of the iceberg. A 2025 RUSI analysis reveals that in 2018, Japan's maritime forces easily used narrowband sonar to identify and track a 093A submarine near the Senkaku Islands. What does this indicate? When China's nuclear submarines operate near the first island chain, they are very easily exposed through the opponent's sophisticated anti-submarine systems. This being seen is likely just the normal situation. During wartime, the enemy's network will become even more tightly configured. As a result, you will find that the hardware is outdated and the training is conservative, creating a dangerous paper tiger of military strength. The numbers look good, the stories are easy to tell, but in a real deep-sea battle, the confidence is far from enough. Number 5. Why has it come to this? A triple lock of technology, industry, and system. China is not lacking in money or shipyards, so why are its nuclear submarines still lagging behind to this extent? Retired Navy Reserve Captain and Department of Defense Naval System Engineer Christopher Carlson technical history is very clear. The first generation 091, 092 submarines had rough pressure hull diameters, reactor power, and noise control. The 093, 094 were half upgraded from 1990s technology, heavily borrowing from Russia's design. Truly independent third-generation design won't appear until after the 093B and new submarines. The problem lies in Reactor miniaturization, high energy density, and long life fuel rods require several generations of engineers' experience. Noise reduction isn't just about adding soundproof tiles and changing propellers. It's a systemic engineering challenge involving overall ship design, pipe layout, equipment isolation, and machining precision. These things cannot be leapfrogged with one-time imports or a few papers. The decades of industrial gaps will eventually be clearly exposed in the noise spectrum of a nuclear submarine. Since 2020, organizations like USNI, SCMP, and ORF have been closely monitoring satellite imagery of Huludao. Bohai Shipyard has built a massive assembly hall for nuclear submarines. Dry docks and shipbuilding slips have been significantly expanded. Meanwhile, images of multiple new submarines being outfitted and launched have appeared. Indian scholars, based on the scale of the facilities, have calculated an alarming figure. When Huludao operates at full capacity, it can launch 3 to 4 attack nuclear submarines and 1 to 2 strategic nuclear submarines annually. This means, on the numbers of submarines metric, China might really have the ability to outpace the US, UK, France, and Russia in the next decade. However, we want to emphasize this. Fast production does not equal high quality production. If production capacity is mainly used to replicate second and a half generation level 093A and 094A submarines, it will only result in rapidly producing more outdated submarines. Only when new designs like 093B, 095, and 096 mature and are produced in bulk will capacity expansion lead to a qualitative transformation. And this depends on whether the technological lock can truly be unlocked. Finally, there's the issue of the system. Nuclear submarines are a high-risk asset. All mature navies understand real combat capability is earned through accidents and bloodshed. Accidents must be recorded, analyzed, and turned into lessons. Mistakes must be truthfully reported to Congress, the media, and military leadership so that the next generation of submarines and crew can build upon the lessons of the past. However, in a system that emphasizes political security and insists on absolutely no accidents, the most typical symptom is when an accident occurs, the first reaction is to shut it down and keep it confidential rather than to reflect. Training is designed with safety and control as the highest goal instead of aiming for real combat readiness. Subordinates are afraid to report real issues, and superiors are unwilling to hear bad news, resulting in reports that paint a picture of everything being fine. For a nuclear submarine, which is an extremely complex system that relies heavily on experience accumulation, this culture is nearly fatal. Number 6, catching the truth and fiction in the story. Can the 093B and 095 turn the tide overnight? At this point, you might ask, what about the newly launched 093B? With pump jet propulsion and vertical launch, it seems pretty impressive. Indeed, the 093B is a significant turning point for China's nuclear submarines. The latest public data shows the 093B uses pump jet propulsion, a first for China's SSNs. Several military intelligence websites and satellite image analysis indicate that the 093B is equipped with a 12 to 18 cell vertical launch system capable of launching long-range anti-ship and land attack cruise missiles similar to the US Navy's Virginia Block VSSGN. Carlson's analysis is more specific. Benefiting from China's precision manufacturing upgrades since 2010, the 093B's noise level is expected to approach the Soviet Sierras class from the 1980s. This is already the level of late Cold War generation submarines. This is, of course, the real improvement. From mid-Cold War Soviet levels, Victor 1, 2, and 3, it has crossed into the threshold of late Cold War Soviet high-end submarines. But you need to pay attention to two things. The opponents haven't stayed in place. The US Virginia class continues to upgrade its blocks. The UK Astute class is fully pump jet. France's Le Triomphant class has just entered service. The noise profiles of these submarines have likely already moved from being classified as quiet submarines in public data to approaching the threshold of super quiet submarines. No matter how many 093B submarines are produced, they cannot immediately fill the noise gap left by the 093A, 094. Old submarines won't retire immediately. Strategic nuclear deterrence still relies on the 094, 094A. When will the new 096 SSBN mature? No one dares to give a definitive timeline. Therefore, a more reasonable conclusion is the 093B is the starting point for China's nuclear submarines to gradually catch up from severe lag, not the endpoint for an overnight turnaround. Therefore, the real danger is not that the submarines don't work, but believing they are very capable. Returning to the title of this video, China's nuclear submarines are far behind the world standards, much more so than many people imagine. This statement is not an insult, but based on 3 layers of reality. Hardware generation gap. The noise level of the 093/094 submarines is roughly stuck at Cold War era Soviet standards. The 093B has just reached the level of late Cold War Soviet high-end submarines, still 1 generation behind the current main forces of the US, UK, and France. Experience gap. There are almost no publicly verifiable records of long-term ocean combat readiness patrol. 0 accident reports likely means never undertaken high-intensity operational missions, rather than flawless performance. Systemic problems. The fleet is heavily dependent on closed information and promotional packaging. It doesn't encourage honest reporting of problems or using accidents as learning opportunities, resulting in a fleet that, though starting late, is burdened by additional obstacles. From a purely technical perspective, China's nuclear submarines are, of course, making progress. The 093A is a generational leap from the 091/092. 093B and future 095/096 might really be able to match the current US, UK, and France fleets in a decade or so. But from a strategic and systemic perspective, what is more concerning is another issue. When a regime is used to packaging its navy as world-class, major breakthroughs, and mass production, the real gaps are often the most deeply hidden. Nuclear submarines are the most unsuitable weapon systems for storytelling. They don't show off, don't appear in parades, and aren't fit for flashy movies. What they need is decades of tedious technical accumulation, ruthless self-assessment, and honest records of failures and accidents. And all of this is in direct conflict with today's political propaganda logic. The most dangerous thing about China's nuclear submarines is not that the noise level is still stuck in the Victoria era, but that too many people genuinely believe we are already world-class, we just aren't telling you yet. When misjudgment becomes consensus, when imagined strength replaces honest confrontation with real gaps, that's when the silent fleet is truly on the edge of danger.